Welcome to Junkanoo Stories. I'm Christopher Ömo-Shango Davis, and today I'm about to speak to you about the true spirit of Junkanoo, the origin and the essence of Junkanoo.
Where did Junkanoo really originate from? Because we always get the slave tale.
Yeah. Well, we speaking specifically to how it got its name and the namesake, right?
Yeah, because and then the culture behind it.
Right, because oftentimes we hear the story of John Canoe being a slave that came to the Bahamas. I've heard different versions of him asking the governor for a day off, and then he said yes, and we were allowed to celebrate. All sorts of different theories. There's another theory of John Canoe, which is a kind of style of dance, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And a lot of people believe that that was also a man who was a very, very good dancer, musician, well known. And that is how the Junkanoo thing got its name and essentially the essence of Junkanoo. And I'm here to tell you that I think that I'm 99.99% sure that that's not the case. Okay, so essentially, John Canoe was never a slave that came to the Bahamas. He was actually a chief of a now today rather unknown and isolated village known today as Princess Town, but in those days it was known as Pocasoo. Okay, not only was he a chief, he was a warrior, a general, and a very, very, very clever merchant. And by the late 1680s or so, he was actually already the king or the chief of Pocasoo. Okay, and many historical sources, they actually try to say that he was this they actually call him a Prussian prince. And even this, when you delve much deeper into his life, you realize that that's a big falsehood. Okay, so before I get into it more, I'll end right there that he was a merchant prince, if you will, or who was one of the sub-chiefs under the Ahantahini of the Ahanta people. Ahantahini meaning the king of all the Ahanta people. And Princess Town sits even today in the southwestern extremity of the nation of Ghana. And it was a very strategic military outpost as well. And his real name was John Canoe. Okay? The Ashanti people call him Gian, G-Y-A-N, still a very common name in Ghana, call him John Canoe. And this is more attached to what the Prussians and even the Dutch referring to him as January Canoe, which is like the Dutch version or one of the Dutch derivations for John, I guess, if you will. And the Germans used to call him John Canoe, J-A-N. And you could see the similarities with the G-Y-A-N, okay? Gian, okay? So his name was John Canoe. And this information was given to me by an oral historian from Princess Town. His name is Alice Kofi. It was also given to me at the Royal Palace in Buswa, right down there in the Ahanta West region, where John Canoe was not only just this great merchant prince, but he was a well-known general that served the Ahantahini, and he was seen as the main vanguard and the first line of defense, not only for the Ahanta people, but the Wassa people, the Bono people, many other different groups from this region. And he commanded over a group of troops that swelled to over 20,000 people at its zenith, a diverse group of warriors that fought against the British and the Dutch slave trade. Okay, and it's amazing that you even have theories that it came from Boxing Day. And I heard this theory that yeah, they used the boxes, that's how you get the cardboard with the no, that's not what happened either. The first Boxing Day was in the 1870s, and the first reference of Junkanoo in the Bahamas was in around 1801 by a man named Dr. Reed. And they had even earlier references outside of the Bahamas. And of course, we didn't have no social media, no WhatsApp. So how is it that you have references of this Junkanoo outside of the Bahamas if he was a single man and a slave that came here? You understand? And if he was just a slave, why would they name all of these commemorations? These commemorations exist in Belize, in Jamaica. They existed even in the United States, in Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia. You understand? They existed in Guyana. They existed in Suriname. They still exist in Barbados. And as well, now these Ahanta people, as well as the Nzima people, they have a festival which is by far one of the more ancient festivals from that region in Ghana, known as the Kundum Festival. And this Kundum festival is not just even the basis for Junkanoo, but all of these African-centered celebrations, commemorations that happen in, for lack of the use of a better term, for teaching purposes, the English-speaking Caribbean, even though we don't speak English. We speak Gullah in the Bahamas, they speak Patois in Jamaica. I think y'all get the point, right? So how is it that this one slave that came here allegedly in the Bahamas could have influenced people all the way down there in South America and Suriname to name their number one, well, not their number one today, but to name their commemorations and their festivals after him? He would have had to have been a man who was extraordinary. He would have had to have been a man that was larger than life itself. And the reason he became so famous was because of his wealth. And his wealth was not based in slave trading. And you could see clearly why his story has been appropriated and whitewashed and swept under the rug, because this man actually represents something that goes completely against the narrative that we often receive dealing with the transatlantic slave trade. See, John Canoe fought vigorously against the British and the Dutch slave trade. He allied himself with the Prussians, and his true intentions came out after the Prussians, quote unquote, sold their possessions, which is more specifically Fort Gross Friedrichsburg, which sits right on the border of Princestown on the coast. And after the Prussians, quote unquote, sold that to the Dutch in 1717, that was when he showed his true colors. He also showed his true colors when a British contingent visited his kingdom in the early 1700s, a man by the name of Dr. Atkins on a ship called, I believe it was called the Voyager. And he came into there and met John Canoe face to face. And John Canoe told him that as long as I'm alive, no white man can be king in this area. I'm the king here. This man was also multilingual, in case you didn't notice, because he was communicating with the Dutch, the Germans, the British. The man even made a visit to present-day Prussia. For those that don't know, Prussia is one of the, was a divided country that came together that forms much of what we know as modern Germany today. Okay? After they did that, he took over that fort, and he held that fort from 1717 to 1724. And while John Canoe was on that scene, you don't have any record of a single slave ship leaving from that area. One of the reasons he was so wealthy was his control of salt, his control of gold mines in the area through his military prowess and being able to spread his territory. And another reason, crucially, he controlled the freshwater reserves in the area. And when I visited Fort Gross Friedrichsburg last summer, one of those reservoirs that he used to give people fresh water was still in existence and still being used to this very day by the people of Pocasoo. I even went there playing devil's advocate, you know, and I was telling them, well, you know, I heard that this man was a slave trader, because many sources, I guess they assume that, oh, wealthy African chief must be a slave trader, right?
So what do you think this story, how you think this story of Johnny Canoe came about?
Well, it was just a British appropriation. They did it, and it's so weird because as much as they feared revolt, as much as they feared anti-colonial sentiment, as much as they feared a great uprising like what eventually happened in Haiti, they still in some way romanticized and glorified it. So in the same way that you saw fictional African characters like Prester John coming up with this great rich African man who owned all this stuff, the same way you see other fictional maroon leaders that pop up was very similar to this John Canoe. And of course, John Canoe being a British perversion of his real name, John Canoe, right? And so when you look at it, they would have had to appropriate the story. And furthermore, particularly in the context of the Bahamas, right? So in Jamaica, their Junkanoo celebrations look a lot different than ours, mainly because they existed in these maroon communities. Many of these communities actually, they still speak Twi. There is no severing of ties there. And this is what pretty much confirmed a lot of my research, you know. Some of them still speak the language, and some of them still use the dialects that still exist today in Western Ghana. You understand? But in the Bahamas, Junkanoo existed and evolved on the slave plantation. And so even it almost happened organically, because you could not be like, well, yeah, this is the king that fought against the British and the Dutch slave trade. that defeated the British in the Battle of Fort Middlecross when he waited until Christmas Day until all of them was drunk and lugging you off for food to invade them. But you all trying to tell us that you all give it to us on Christmas Day. But the general that we know used to wait until Christmas Day is a military strategy. You know, this thing goes very deep, and the more you research about it, you understand why it's that way. Now, in the Bahamas, it's had to be watered down. And then this was exacerbated in our modern history with us taking that route of going the tourism route, okay? And that in itself is a complex issue because today, most people who are interested in history and heritage tourism, they come in to get that authenticity and they want to know what really happened, you know? But of course, when our tourism product since the mid 1800s or so was beginning to develop, you know, people would run away from that. And so we kind of shifted right into this mode where we always had to water down what happened here, water down a history or a quiet revolution, well-behaved Negroes, docile people. We ain't never fight for this. We ain't never had this here. We never had that here. Oh, slavery wasn't that bad in the Bahamas, and you see how it evolves just pandering towards this very subservient version of a certain tourism product. And that's essentially how it happened. And so that's the birth of Johnny Canoe. And then Johnny Canoe became Merry Mandarin. You have all of these newspaper articles from the 1930s talking about how the Bahamian government let us have John Canoe, and it's all in good fun, fine and dandy, you know. And another thing, what began more so as people actually doing reenactments more likely of the battles and defeats that happened between Gian Quao and all of the other great Ahanta leaders, I might have to add, because he was not the only one. These Ahanta people represent a history that the entire African diaspora can be proud of because they have a long line of several different leaders that fought unequivocally against the transatlantic slave trade. And this is why their story has not been told and their story has not been inserted into the mainstream. You understand? Sorry to digress, but essentially you could see how John Canoe became this man. I don't know if you ever saw any of the old pictures, but they like have this man wearing like the white stockings with the white face and all that stuff. Then you have reports from slave masters reporting about John Canoe, say, oh, look at them, they're mimicking us and they're doing this. But then you also have other reports talking about, oh my God, they're worshiping the devil and this is all very scary to me. And when you look at the Kundum Festival that I had the pleasure of being invited to by Chief Augustine in October and witnessing myself, you could see why it was scary to the slave master. And then you also saw some of the similarities that you see in reports of the old John Canoe, people dressing up like Europeans and doing these other things, you understand? And what I believe that was more so reenactments of what was happening between Gian Quao and these other people. But through these paternalistic British lenses. And prior to us actually going to Africa to research these things, we had British, Dutch, and German sources, all of which are top level cringe-worthy paternalism. You understand what I'm saying? It's like crazy levels of paternalism, you know, and it got to the point where many of them were saying that John Canoe became something for the entertainment of the slave master. You understand? Or the colonizer. And then you still see it today where it has been watered down and the entire spirit of it has been lost. It's a reason why we call it Russian and they call Carnival playing mass. It's because there ain't nothing too playful about John Canoe. You know, it's a reason, at least I believe, why we don't chant, you know, we chant things like warriors when John Canoe playing. You know, for me, it's reasons for these things, you understand? And it's also a reason why he would be commemorated. Well, as I understand it, traditionally in the Bahamas, we have 4 types of drums. The tom-tom, the bass, then it's the other one that's a little above the goat skin. Yeah. And other one, it's another one. I know it's another size one. Can't remember.
And then they only use 3 more than because they have the tom-tom.
Okay, right. But you have the same concept over there in Western Ghana as well, you know. But people often confuse the evolution of John Canoe with the origins of it, which is what I'm speaking to. Because as I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you was recording when I said it, but the vast majority of enslaved people that came to the Bahamas and even the ones that were freed as so-called liberated Africans came from present-day southern Nigeria. And many of them would have been Igbo, Yoruba, they saying Fawn, and these different groups that still reside in these areas today. But the first 3 slave ships that came to the Bahamas came from present-day Ghana. And then you had decades until there was any appreciable number of people coming directly from Africa into the Bahamas. And so those Akan people was what laid the foundation. It would be just like if a group of Bahamians founded another country on another island. In the first 100 years of that, it'll probably mirror a lot of the things that Bahamians do. You know what I mean? They might have another festival as more, say you have a bunch of Hindus and people starting to come in, and then they start infusing their culture, and then all of a sudden it's more people from East India than people from the Bahamas that now form this country a few hundred years later. It ain't gonna look the same as Junkanoo, but I bet you they'll still call it Junkanoo, because that's what they met here already, And so those early Akan people were the ones that kind of set that foundation. And even after John Canoe's, John Kwao's zenith, so one of the things that struck me was you have a man named William Ansah, real name Ansah Samasareko, right? He was actually a Fante. And the Fante was supposed to be the known enemies of these people. And even William Ansah, when he was enslaved, he was actually a prince, a member of the royal family of the Fante people, one of the other largest ethnic groups in Ghana today. And he had nothing but good things to say about John Kwao, especially when he came over here in Barbados and started to witness what was actually happening. And the attitude was to put it in layman's terms, wow, we should have really listened to this John Kwao fellow. We should have followed him. We need another John Kwao to come and unify us and help us to push toward, you understand? And this was a man who was an enemy, who was from a group that was the enemy of these people. You understand what I'm saying? And so it shows you the level. And of course, I'm sure many of the stories about him would have been embellished. You understand? I'm absolutely certain about that. That's how it works. But we do have empirical data on some of the things that he did. We have data on battles that he won in the surrounding forts in the area. And amazingly, but not so amazingly, when you understand that those that fight the hardest against colonization also tend to get the short straw drawn when you look at this modern development, and so it's easy to see why that region in Ghana has been overlooked. But even when you get closer, all of the surrounding forts are considered World UNESCO Heritage Sites, except for the one that John Kwao was operating from. But you've got to ask yourself why that is. And it's a direct link to us in the Bahamas, as I mentioned. Baileys, their Junkanoo is actually in the form of a play in which women are not allowed to participate. You understand? In Jamaica, it's very...
Junkanoo, like where they have the rags and things like that. Because
right, it's all sorts of different things. And you see other ones where they have like these things with the rifles and all of that stuff.
Yeah,
but
and St. Lucia has like a form too. But in a lot of these places, they have their... Well, we feel in the Bahamas that Junkanoo is dying out, but there in these other places, they feel like it really like on its last win, like
right, exactly. Oh yeah,
in a few years.
Right. The last official Junkanoo celebration in Jamaica, I believe, was 1975.
Wow.
Officially, they still have people that do it.
Yeah, in the streets. Like,
right. Yeah. And actually, because Jamaica also has a version of music, I think the name escapes me, but it's very akin to our rake and scrape. And that is what they actually associate with Junkanoo.
Yeah, because they be playing that.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. So you know what they're saying, right?
Yeah.
It's very similar to it, right? And so, of course, a lot of research I'm doing, I don't know if it's correct to say it's seminal, but I'm definitely the first person I know to dive in this deep. I was the first person from the Bahamas to go to Princestown that they know of, and actually dive into it. And everybody was saying the same thing about this guy locally. And then when I got into those that actually knew, it was even deeper. And like I said, the more I learn about him, even though I went over there kind of playing devil's advocate at first, you know what I mean? And then when we actually got a little close and I started to share some of my research, you know, and I showed them how, well, look, you could now really say that this man was not a slave trader because we don't have any records of any ships leaving from here while he was in charge. You understand what I'm saying? And it's almost like an abrupt stop at certain dates, you know what I mean? So it's absolutely amazing stuff. And if anything, I need to mention too that John Canoe's throne is still there. You know, and I have the privilege to meet and become very good friends, and he's actually sort of become a mentor to me now. And I still can't say his proper title properly because it's literally like a 9-syllable word, but I can give it a try. Apu Bus Wapanin Yor Augustine. He's the chief of Princestown today, and he sits in the same throne that John Canoe sat in. And we have to realize that yes, John Canoe was very closely associated to the Bahamas, but he's not just a Bahamian hero, but a hero for the entire diaspora when we realize what he did. This is a man that successfully fought against the transatlantic slave trade. And not to give too much info, but like in so many other incidences, you look at another great king, Shakazulu, in the Zulu kingdom. It wasn't Shakazulu himself, but it was his successor that was start beginning to face the British and be defeated. And every time you see that Europeans made a further encroachment into African territory, they also made new strides in their military technology. So in the case of the Zulus, it was the invention of the machine gun. And based on Shakazulu's military strategy, they were not able to conquer the Zulus until they invented the machine gun, right? In the case of John Canoe, it was one of the first times any British force had ever used hand grenades. So when you look at people, especially again younger kids and stuff, and this is also a question that you get not coming from you, of course, but it's often a disingenuine question that's used by the naysayers of Pan-African politics, philosophy, or even an Afrocentric outlook on history. And they often say, well, if African societies were so great, what happened and how did they fall? Well, first of all, it didn't happen overnight. You have numerous African kingdoms that survive almost right through the colonial period, and only when that thing that a lot of scholars don't like to talk about, because oftentimes we live in this world where might is right. And so when you speak about things like more advanced military technology, in our westernized mindset, it sometimes could seem like you trying to say, well, they was more advanced than this civilization. That's not the case. Civilization, the root of that word is civil. If I say let's be civil, that means let's live in peace. So the ones doing all the killing is the uncivilized ones. Don't care who wearing shoes or whatever, even though Africans have and had nicer shoes than Europeans, right? Sorry to digress. Now, again, when you look at Shakazulu, again, is another great example. He's a very complex figure. Like my other personal favorite, John Jacques Dessalines. And Shakazulu is actually the first African person or king, or from a historical standpoint, that I actually fell in love with, you know. Now, Shakazulu rose to power for one simple reason that seems very simple, but it points to the focus that African societies generally had. You had societies that were more militaristic, and as European and Arab encroachment began to happen, it actually benefited them in the long run. But most African societies did not focus on being militarily powerful. They didn't focus on these things. Like even the ones that had discovered things like explosives, they used them more for like mining and making artificial lakes and engineering. They didn't say, well, wow, this explodes. I wonder what this will do to a human body. That's for a whole nother discussion, right? Right. And then you even look at what has been the focus. So I have to be careful to word it in a way that people don't see that I'm saying that this society is more advanced. I mean it in quite the opposite way. Now, when you look at the Zulus, one of the reasons Shakazulu was so successful, he created, or modified, I should say, the assegai. Warfare in South Africa, by today's standards, in terms of efficiency, in terms of death and killing, was laughable. Many times they would just have the best scholars and jousters, if you will, come out there, and they would literally just talk and argue and make fun of each other. You would even have entire families out there on the battlefield. And they had these long spears where they would throw it, and casualties would generally be very low. Okay? Shakazulu shortened the spear and changed the warfare in the region to being short. He also invented a military strategy that was based off of the bullhorns, where you would have the big, strong, adult and best fighters and the best men at the brunt of the bull's horns, and the younger and the weaker fighters go along to the tip, and so they enter the battle last. And Europeans were not able to defeat this military strategy even after Shakazulu had died. What happened was they invented the machine gun, known as the Maxing gun in that time. I believe it was called Bral or some formation. It was a Dutch word because it was both the Dutch and the British, the Boers, you know. You have companies like the Rio Tinto Diamond Company. These companies that still exist today, that still control significant portions of the world's diamond supplies, that were founded on the murder of Zulus and Xhosa people and people from this region. And this is all kind of interconnected. They only were able to defeat the Zulus after they invented this Maxing gun. And because they were so embittered by actually losing battles to these Zulus, oftentimes, the rules of warfare were not followed. And in the paternalistic way, the songs that the Zulus were singing at the end of some of these massacres, which is what they became, was actually to try to appease these men to stop. And also so that when their their brothers and sisters passed on to the next side, they would do it to a certain level of comfort. And you actually had British generals and Dutch generals reporting that they respect us so much that they singing for us. You know, all of these different things may seem unrelated, but it shows you how that European propaganda operated at that time. And every time you see a great African kingdom fall to Europeans, I'll bet you that they had recently had some major advancement in their military technology. What we would call hand grenades in the early 1700s, they were not the same traditional ones that we would think of, the modern ones, but it was essentially the same concept where you had like a fuse and then you would throw it over into something that would explode. Junkanoo was actually helping the Han Tahini at the time, and he wasn't even present when he was actually expelled, right? But they used those grenades to move him, and then he got wind of what was happening, because after he had defeated the Dutch several times, they came with reinforcements, and they just happened to arrive while he was up the road in Buswa, helping out the Han Tahini against both the British and the Dutch and a group of people known as the Wassa, okay? And then after that, this is his fate now, because people could be like, what happened to him? He was taken to Kumasi, which is today the capital of the Ashanti people. He had great relationships with Oswey Tutu I, who was the founder of the Great Ashanti Empire. And then he was given land in that area and founded a city known as Kwadaso. And his gold coin had a calabash on it. Kwadaso meaning calabash. And the mythos goes that this man was so wealthy, he scooped up his gold in his calabash and gave it to you. He was well loved and well respected by his enemies, well loved by his subjects and his counterparts as well. And it's easy to see why, you know, because everywhere we went, I went to different people, the Fante people, went to the Royal Palace and spoke to some of the council of the Santahini, went to Princestown, went all over Ahanta West region, spoke to Wassa people and even a few Ewe people. None of them had anything bad to say about the man, despite me knowing that some of them was actually fighting against him at certain, you know, points during his reign. Right, exactly, you understand? And so that all really convinced me that this man was something special, and especially that his name has survived for so long, right? Had to have been something special. We had so many great African kings. Why is it not called Oswey Tutu Fest, you know? He was the founder of the Ashanti kingdom, the more well-known kingdom, the one that everyone knows they wear gold from head to toe. You understand what I'm saying? Why not him and why Junkanoo? You understand? Because he really was something special, and that's why I'm so excited about the research. And I'm fully convinced, especially when I follow the transatlantic slave trade, as well. And there's something that the Bahamas also shares. I can just move right into it. And then we end right. So one thing that kind of puzzled me was how is it that all of these places that have some form of John Canoe commemoration, whether it's a play like Pele's, whether it's like a festival like in Jamaica or a parade like us, they all share something else, which is this Akan revolutionary national hero, right? So the father of Guyana is a man known as Kofi or Coffee. Kofi, this is a very common name today in Ghana. Jamaica, you have Cujo, again, very common name in Ghana. Nani, which is derivative of Nana, which actually means king or queen in Ghana, right? Then you have Kwaku in Antigua. Kwaku's plan was actually to take over the whole island of Antigua and make Antigua a colony of the Ashanti of the Ashanti Empire in West Africa, right? Then you have Queen Brefu. Notice they're calling a lot of women here too. Queen Brefu was the Virgin Islands. You understand? And she had taken over 2 islands in the Virgin Islands and expelled all whites from the island on which she was enslaved on, right? All of these people were Akan people. The New York Fire of 1712, led by Akan women. The New York Fire of 1741, also carried out by Akans. All over, you have all these Akan revolutionary heroes, right? And in all these places where these heroes had their home base is where you see these commemorations of John Canoe. And I thought to myself, why is it that the Bahamas don't have none? But we do have one. So there's a man who is a footnote in Bahamian history, and it's a misnomer known as Quarino with an R. I actually viewed the documents. It was a letter written by Governor Fitzwilliam, who was actually the target of Kwamino's plot, right? And it was just a simple misreading of the handwriting, and his name was Kwamino. And like you guessed it, Kwamino is another very, very common name in Ghana today. I actually met about 8 Kwaminos and Kwaminas and about 30 Kwamis, and you understand, like these names were very common. And as I was giving presentations, everyone's face was lighting up. Hey, that's my name, that's my mother's name, that's my auntie's name, you know. Kwamina's plan came to fruition in 1734, but unfortunately it was foiled. But his plan was to kill all of the slave masters, colonists, and whites on the island, starting with Governor Fitzwilliam. And up until that point, the governor didn't have any special protected place to live. But after they discovered this plot by Kwamino, they then said, well, we got to build this place for the governor to stay on a place called Mount Fitzwilliam today, named after the same governor who Kwamino had planned to kill. When they captured Kwamino, he actually killed one of the people, and they only luckily captured him. And when they started to whip people and torture them and interrogate them, as was typically done any and everywhere in a case like this, they learned that the plot was very, very widespread, much like his Akan counterparts. So unlike a Kofi or a Queen Nani or Captain Cujo, he wasn't able to carry out his plan. But it requires a lot more research, and the information is so scant on this man. But it is definitely plausible to believe that he would have had a plan similar to Kwaku, because what would have been the end result of him taking over the island of New Providence? You understand? It would have had to have been an end result. One theory was that he might have looked to gather some ships and sail back to present-day Ghana. Another theory is that, like Kwaku, he might have looked to take over the country and actually spread an African empire into the Western Hemisphere. And I just wish Kwaku's bold plan would have been successful, because things might have gone a lot differently. And even people like William Answer kind of opined on that, you know. And so this is what the essence and the true essence of John Canoe is. It's revolution, you know. The chairman of the African People's Socialist Party said something very profound to me personally a few years ago. And I saw him say it in a few speeches, but he said there's nothing more honorable, there's nothing more commendable than a people that are fighting for their freedom. And this is what John Canoe represents. And every scholar has always accredited that to an aspect of John Canoe, a celebration of freedom. There's an old James Bond movie called Thunderball. And that's one of the reasons why I lean towards that reenactment of battles thing. So in this movie Thunderball, there's a scene where James Bond chasing the villain or being chased by the villain, and he's actually running through a live Junkanoo parade from 1956. and it looks very different. You have two groups on the street at the same time, and it's like they playing towards each other. Completely different than what we know today. The parade, unfortunately, what is added to John Canoe, John Quao being lost in translation, is tourism being our product, and us having this feeling of having to water down our history, or at least the revolutionary aspects of our history, in order to make our guests feel more comfortable. You understand? And so the parade itself, ironically, based on my understanding, was actually formulated after the Trinidadian Carnival. You know what I mean? And making it into a competition, making it into a parade, one that's more palatable to that. And it's not, of course, the main Trinidadian Carnival in any way, shape, or form. I just think that it's very ironic that when we had this Junkanoo Carnival thing, everyone was so up in arms about having Carnival influence Junkanoo when it already has since the 1950s and 60s or so. You know, so there you have it. But again, I encourage people to watch Thunderball. You don't have to watch the whole movie, and if you just skip to the Junkanoo scene, and you can see how Junkanoo used to look. It wasn't so friendly and smiley back then. And remember, it was something that used to actually scare the majority of white people. There's a man named Orman Ramsey. I call him a living griot. He's in his 80s, live in Fox Hill most of his life. Born in Kid Island, though. He tells me stories from the 50s and 60s about when they used to have rush outs. Just like the Kundum Festival. The Kundum Festival starts in certain villages, and as it goes on, it increases in size. Just like we used to have the rush outs back in the day. Rush outs start in Fox Hill, and they go through Claridge Road, Kemp Road, and all these places, Mason's Addition, and everyone joining and joining and joining. By the time they reach Wolf Road, they get a big crew of rushes. But what they don't like to tell you is when they was heading back, enough time, them same people there in Blair, where you see that wall of segregation, just like Collins Wall. Collins Wall is that wall along Bernard Road is more of a segregatory or a instrument of gentrification, if you will, than the Collins Wall. That same wall that's still standing today and still being used today, that cuts off Blair from Bernard Road. Enough time, according to Mr. Ramsey, when they used to rush coming back into Fox Hill, they used to call the police, and they used to have the police there waiting on them. Because Junkanoo was not something that was accepted. It was not moved to Bay Street until majority rule happened. And that's a whole nother thing. So it was never fully accepted. And even now, I still hear pastors who demonize Junkanoo. You know, it's absolutely insane. And when you demonize it, and when you demonize Junkanoo, essentially, you demonizing John Quao, and essentially you demonizing those that fought against the transatlantic slave trade. You know, after he was taken to Kumasi, his followers, the people that served on him, these were the ones that were brought into the new world, if you will, into the Western Hemisphere, into slavery. And of course, with them, they would have brought the Astorias. Now, my theory is that this Kwamina fellow might have had a very, very close relationship. Still doing research on that. Hopefully it pans out, but I feel like he has, and others would have had a very, very close relationship with John Quao, given the fact that we aren't really known for any admiration of our African heritage, yet we have the biggest commemoration to John Quao in the entire world, even bigger than the one in Ghana. So, yeah, it leaves you to think about who we actually are, right? Yeah. We aren't these passive, docile fellas who were contented in our station, as this explorer Daniel McKinnon put it, who came in the Bahamas in the early 1800s and talking about how happy we were and how nice everything was here in the Bahamas, you know, and how well the slaves were treated and all of this stuff. A pro-slavery advocate, I may add. Right? So we have to be careful where we get our information from. And that also adds to how this John Canoe story, it's pretty obvious to see how. And then just to put it plainly, we couldn't be here celebrating a man that fought against the British openly and freely, you know. And so I definitely believe that a part of it was even some of our ancestors kind of play acting to, yeah, well, listen to this. Let me beat my drum, please. Let me go over here. If you take, you know, and that's what it was. And it was also associated with Obia, all of these things. I see people talking about the rites of Bacchus, you know, that's where the word bacchanal comes from, and they used to say the same thing they say about Carnival, they used to say about Junkanoo. You know, same thing. And Trinidad, ironically, has a Princess Town too, and Princess Town is the sister city of the Princess Town where Junkanoo was from in Ghana, right? So too many connections to name. I could sit there until tomorrow morning and talk about the connections between us and these people. When these people driving and they drop in a pothole, right? All of them is saying something in unison, just like us. Ish. So we drop in the pothole, all these fellas and tweet, ish, what is sick? An expression used at the crucial moment of impact, just like itch in the Bahamas. They get a symbol, they have these antinkra symbols, and they have an antinkra symbol that means hand come, hand go. Bird for bird. You know, they get this fish dish similar to stew fish but a lot spicier. Then you have banku, fufu, rice balls, all these things. You take it, eat it with your hand, dip it in the fish. You know, too many similarities. Fellas just walk with a bop. Just like us. And as we do more research, shout out to Chief Augustine, the man who sits in the throne of Junkanoo. Shout out to Alice Kofi, the oral historian and guide over there in Princess Town. Shout out to Simon. Shout out to my brother Sam Akpo, Dan Accra. Shout out to Jessica. And of course, shout out to Assembly member, my partner, Stephen Kenya Arthur, who is an Assembly member over there in the Hunter West region. And I'll also have to shout out the great whale, Atumfo Asantahini, Badu Bantu the 15th. That's the king of all the Hunter. So shout out to him. You all know I'm a Western guy, so I still practicing by Chui and all of that. But yeah, there are many, many links between us and these people, culturally and in our heritage, you know. And I encourage people to actually take this pilgrimage to Parkasoo as we develop this, because we're going to be providing this opportunity to all Bahamians and all people of the diaspora to start to learn about this great hero that fought against the Dutch and the British slave trade. You know, and I think that we all should be commemorating this man to a certain degree, and he should become a household name as he is in the Bahamas and in certain areas of the Caribbean. Thank you for watching Junkanoo Stories. You know, appreciate my brother having me here. Hopefully I'll see you all on here again soon as I find out more and I come here to share it with you all. Thank you again, and God bless.